Well, this is JC. I didn't know I looked this scroungy until I did this. Um, I was in putting a water filtration system underneath my sink for the drinking water. Anyhow, and I was like, you know what? Somebody listened pretty fast. I better go ahead and do another chapter of detective story. So here goes. This will be chapter 8. Chapter 8. Where is it? Yeah, chapter 8. Now, this is called Home Alone, and you remember what happened in the last chapter. I'm not going to go back over it, but just to remind you, to remind yourself what happened in the last chapter. And this is just to take off on that. Okay, Anne knew what was coming. She was doing nothing now but waiting for the telephone to ring. She knew it would ring. She didn't know when, but she knew it would ring soon. She went into the kitchen. She considered making coffee, but decided not to. What she would like right now was a beer. She was on duty and knew she shouldn't drink, not even one beer, but the desire for an alcoholic beverage built up in her, and she remembered she had bought a six-pack of Bud Light a few days earlier, and she hadn't had one yet. What the hell, she said aloud, who would know? And she opened the refrigerator door. For a moment, she didn't reach for the beer. She only stared at it. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't as it should be, but her brain was having trouble trying to relay the appropriate information to her consciousness to provide an answer as to what was wrong. Then a chill started over her. Her forehead turned cold, and tiny beads of perspiration formed along her hairline. She felt herself shiver and felt weak in her legs. She left the refrigerator door open and quickly backed to a chair and sat down. She couldn't stop staring at the beer. A tiny charge of energy flashed through her brain. A beer is missing. A beer was gone, and she hadn't taken it. She had not drunk any of the beers, but one was missing from the six-pack. Oh, God, she said aloud, as she was prone to do when things happened that she couldn't control. What is going on? The question already had an answer that she wished not to acknowledge. It was starting all over again. Anne jumped up from the chair and headed toward the living room, just as the phone rang. Unconsciously, she glanced at her watch. It had been exactly half an hour since the phone had rung earlier. He's right on time, she said, and picked up the receiver. Detective Barton, Anne said, and waited for an answer. A voice answered, "Hello, Detective Barton." "You son of a bitch," she said. "Who in the hell do you think you are? You've been in my house. I'll blow your ass away if I ever see you. Meet me somewhere, you coward, and let's see what you're made of." There was silence. Only Anne's heavy breathing could be heard. Anne waited. She listened for the click of the phone being hung up. It didn't come. She started to speak again when the voice said, "I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Now you know what to do," and the voice was gone. Detective Anne Barton did know what to do, and now a sense of relief came over her. The waiting was over. Her task had been assigned to her, and she felt much better. Back at the station house, the chief sat at his desk, deep in thought. Strange things had been happening, and he had no idea why. His mind went back in time to where he perceived the strange happenings to have started. It was true. The events of the Tulsa City Police and Sheriff's Departments were unusual. From the advent of the consolidation of the two official departments into one department, right up to the demolition of Billy Thompson's house. What was the specific event that would explain these weird occurrences that had been happening? First, he had been elected high sheriff. Then, when the police chief died, he was appointed temporary chief because of the considerable infighting for the job by the other police officers. Then the city council voted to make his dual position permanent. Next, Billy Thompson, the force's youngest officer, was hired. Then Anne Barton, the force's only woman cop, somehow solved the Ben Abbott murder case that had been unsolved for 4 years, and she received a commendation for that and was promoted to detective by Mayor Rafton for doing just that. Then the mayor had been killed while sitting in his car. Then Anne Barton's car had been totaled for no apparent reason by someone from Fowler. Then Billy Thompson's house was blown up and burned down. Then, without a word, Billy had left town. Now Ann was acting weird. The sheriff was torn between trying to figure out what the problem was and just trying to forget the whole thing. He was the kind of person who felt an obligation to help anyone who needed help whenever he could, but this situation was unique. This situation, whatever it was, seemed beyond his control and understanding. Then he made a silent decision. He'd get back to work and disregard everything that had anything to do with Billy. He hoped that would include any involvement Ann had with Billy's problems. Having made that decision, he reached for a crossword puzzle book, picked up a pencil. Now he could relax. Well, Ann knew what she had to do now. She began to gather sacks and boxes she would need to hold the things she needed to collect. In her mind, she was already sorting and indexing the things she would collect. From here on, she would have to be very careful not to be too conspicuous. She would have to work quietly and spend much of her own time doing what she knew she had to do. For the next few weeks, Ann Barton collected paraphernalia from everyone she could think of who was in any way connected with Mayor Rafton. She had articles of clothing, movie theater ticket stubs from a couple of his friends, photos of acquaintances that she managed to acquire, and other various and sundry articles she came by one way or another. She had the original schedules of civil ceremonies that had been attended by the mayor and his associates. She had credit card gas purchase receipts for every officer on the force. She had so many different things from so many different people that it took her several hours to list and index it all. After it all was listed and placed in separate piles, she got a container for each pile. After the containers were filled, she placed all of them in 2 garbage bags and twisted the tops and tied them shut. Then she waited. Ann Barton was at her desk this Monday morning, doodling on a piece of paper. She looked at squiggles, squares, straight lines, and swirls that she had made on the paper with her ballpoint pen. They looked like the ones she used to make in the 3rd grade when she practiced her penmanship. What a long time ago that was. She wondered if people regressed back to earlier, more carefree times when they doodled like this. She wondered if those earlier times were, indeed, more carefree. She could remember being anxious about whether or not the squiggles and lines she made in her practice were good enough to please her teacher. A little lump formed in her throat thinking about it, and she felt a deep sigh start. It was an audible sigh and long enough to attract the attention of Mel Vernon, who was sitting nearby. Well, with a big old sigh like that, you must be thinking about your lost love. Billy, what's his name? He said, and he laughed loudly. This brought Ann out of her reverie, and she looked up with a grin. Not in this lifetime, she replied. No, I was just thinking about my childhood when I went to grammar school. I guess I had it made then and didn't even know it. Mel, Ann asked, if you could go back to your childhood, do you think you would? Be 6 again or 8 like that. No way, said Mel. I used to get my ass whipped about every day when I was a kid. My old man was a drunk, and nothing pleased him more than to slap us around when he had had a couple. My mom and sister still have scars from the old bastard beating on them. Nah, I wouldn't miss any of that. I like where I am right now. That's good, said Ann. I sure like your wife. She's sweet. And you couldn't ask for a better friend than Charlie. Ann referred to Charlie Ford, another officer and a very close friend to Mel and Lois Vernon. Yeah, it couldn't be any better. Ann and Mel were both deep in their thoughts and both jumped when the phone rang. Mel grabbed it quickly. Officer Vernon, said Mel. May I help you? Can I talk to Detective Barton? The voice asked. Could I say who's calling? Asked Mel. She'll know, the voice said. Mel covered the mouthpiece and told Ann the call was for her and she knew who it was. Ann picked up the phone and said, This is Detective Barton. Take everything to the same place before midnight tonight, the voice said, and then hung up the phone. Ann slowly put the phone back in its cradle. How could he know she was finished with her collecting? She saw Mel looking a question at her, and she said, It must have been some prankster. He told me to have a happy holiday. It takes